ANC's been very clear that they can and they will replace you. And they've shown that in the way that they've done now with the budget speech. The dilemma is ultimately, is it unity in name? Or is it... The dilemma is that it is unity in name, but division in practice.
Yeah. Welcome back to Born Free. My name's Kumalo, and today I'm here with my co-host.
Hello, I'm Otsile Nkadimeng. Am I supposed to look at you? We're doing this anyway. You know I exist, but I'm going to focus on my co-host for today.
Of course. Hey, it's been a crazy week.
Yeah.
The budget, the GNU, it's all happening. But I want to start at the start. How are you feeling after all that's happened? Now that there's a budget that's passed, now that there's a potential for VAT to be increased? Well, it might be. We don't know. May 1st, they have communicated that. We're kind of in the mix of it now. It feels like it's real. It feels like the GNU's starting to turn its wheels, if you believe that. But yeah, what's your thoughts on at the moment and where we are?
Well, firstly, I mean, I never doubted that the budget was going to pass. I mean, I believed the ANC would find a way to work around any people that wanted to oppose its budget and this VAT increase. Especially after like the compromise, because we heard the party members coming up saying, listen, guys, we wanted 2%. You didn't want to give us 2%. So now we're at 0.5%.
Yeah.
Meet us. We've gone more than halfway. But like I'm feeling good because I'm thinking two things. One, most people didn't look at revenue. The government needed the revenue. Expenditure is going to increase this year. We needed the revenue. Otherwise, we're going to risk defaulting on a lot of payments.
Yeah.
So from the economic side, I'm very happy. Socially, like, I'm going to have to pay more money now. Guys, this economy.
Yeah, I think to walk it back, so 194 for the budget, 182 against the budget. With the ANC voting with people outside of the government of national unity. The parties that, of course, affirmed the vote, the ANC, the IFP, Patriotic Alliance, UDM, Rise Mzansi, Good Party, Al Jamar, PAC, and the two additional ones who are not part of the GNU, Action SA and Build One South Africa, considered the kingmakers in the committee meeting when there was a 6-5 vote. I think, let's start with the budget, just the budget as it exists. I think there's a lot that you've already said, particularly to the compromises that have been made by the ANC, moving from that 2% all the way down to that 0.5. But there's been an element of how the DA has communicated it that the ANC has been unwilling to compromise, that the ANC has been unwilling to shift its goalpost, and that they want to lead independent of the DA. They don't want to have individuals have influence, have insight on what's happening with the financial policy, but also with the legislative policy within the country. What are your takes on that? And particularly with how the budget did start at 2%, came down to 0.5. We had to decrease certain grants. There was major pushbacks against austerity measures. As we look at it, the budget that ended up coming out is though it does harm South Africans as a result of individuals having to pay more. The basket of goods has been increased. There's an element to South Africans do get the benefits of being able to access things such as grants like the COVID grant. There's the benefit of people still being able to have childcare protection. There's the benefit of things such as NHI and potentially being implemented or starting to be planned around. There's a lot of things that seem to be benefiting civil society that we're not appreciative of because of this big hoo-ha around 0.5 VAT. But now where we look at it, and particularly where we look at the GNU and when we look at this budget, do you think this was the budget for South Africa? Do you think this is the one that's likely going to be pushed through? And do you think citizens should still fight for there not to be VAT?
I mean, the reality is that the majority of the VAT burden is going to be felt by higher income households, 75% roughly. But just extracting VAT from the conversation, this budget isn't a bad budget. It's a solid 7 out of 10. So all of this hysteria, people must just also realize that it doesn't have to do with a lot of financial mechanisms.
Yeah.
What it has to do fundamentally is political mechanisms moving in the background. It has to do with the DA not getting its way on NHI, Bella, and expropriation and deciding, okay, this is where we're going to fight this thing out. And they lost. So I think realistically, when we look at this budget, we shouldn't be assessing it on the merits of its financials because it's a good financial budget for the country. We should be looking at this in terms of the political fight around the budget because that's really where this challenge is. But I think to that, there's also another dimension to the conversation. And that dimension being fundamentally, when we're looking at the current ongoings with relation to this budget, now that it's clear that the ANC has shown that they're going to work around the Democratic Alliance on this specific, the first vote to pass this budget, there's two more left. I stand to be corrected there. Yeah. I believe there's two more left. It's a question of what happens now, what happens next. The DAs obviously said they're going to challenge this in court. Whether they win, yet to be seen, because legally, I mean, I'm not a legal practitioner yet. I'm just a law student, but I don't think there's any justifiable merit to an argument that can be made that this budget was passed incorrectly, though there have been questions around procedure and all of that. That mainly, I think, has to do with house rules more than it has to do with court proceedings. But it's a good budget. I think we mustn't walk away from the fact that this is a good budget. It's a good budget that meets the objectives, meets the needs of the country. Right now where we are, particularly given an environment of macroeconomic austerity, not just in South Africa, but around the world, especially given now that, and this is the economist side of me coming out, especially in an environment where outside of the budget chat in South Africa, America just released new tariffs, which is going to increase inflationary pressures around the world. If there were ever a budget where I think we eat it now so that maybe later the Reserve Bank can say, okay, we're going to cut rates so that people can have access to more capital and more things can flow. I think this would be the budget that prepares us for that, especially because, like, I'm telling you now, around the world, we're about to see the real pressures of these tariffs coming out of America. Yeah,
I think the interesting there is that, of course, the rise or the potential for a global recession being discussed, and also the potential for a recession in South Africa. I was listening to Sizwe Mpofu Walsh's podcast, and he was speaking to, I forget his name, Burke. I forget his first name, but he's the DA finance spokesperson. And he said a very interesting point. He said GDP growth is currently between 0.6, 0.3 roughly, right? And we've been speaking about the disappearance of AGOA, which essentially was tariff-free goods to the United States.
And which is gone now.
Yes, which is gone now. And we spoke about how that was going to impact 1% of GDP. Now, the interesting thing around that is 1% of GDP going down with 0.6 technically means you're in the negatives. But also with the addition of tariffs means that South African economy is going to be hit with quite a great deal of inflationary measures, as you mentioned. And so the question is South Africa bound for a recession? And if so, who is to blame? Because I think this budget shows quite a lot of what's happening in South Africa, of trying to acclaim victory and trying to ensure that you're the one that's seen doing good for South Africans, particularly around the DA, the EFF, and the MK being staunch against this VAT increase as a means of showing that they stand with citizens. But at the same time, if things do go bad and no one has an answer, what do we say to government as a whole? What do we say to the GNU? Because I think it's shown true, and it shows quite significantly in the fights that are happening right now, where we've got finance ministers saying if you don't support the budget, you can't be part of government. And so if we're at that point where there's now a thing of we can't have you part of this government because you won't take accountability in the instances in which this thing fails. You won't necessarily implement it in the ways in which we believe it should be implemented. There's a great degree of economic instability that faces South Africa. And I think it shows itself even more when the Business Union of South Africa wrote a letter to the GNU partners to say, actually, we need you guys to stay together. We need you to ensure that we have some degree of economic stability, some degree of political stability. And they recognized even though there isn't been a bridgeable gap, there has to be a bridge somewhere and that they should be able to work it out. And taking all of that said, with all of that good and chaos and terror, what do you think of Action SA as the kingmaker who's kind of put us in this situation, and not Rise Mzansi, Build on South Africa? Both of these parties, almost a year ago, said to us they would never work with the ANC. They were staunch against working with the ANC because they wanted to stand with this belief of the ANC has failed, the people have voted them out, therefore we're not willing to cooperate with them. It's interesting to see that they've flipped, but it's more interesting to see that they could be beneficiaries of the GNU if they're allowed to be worked in. What do you take on their role, particularly at this moment in South Africa, but also particularly in their political ideology, where they say they're not working with the ANC and then always a few months later, them and the ANC are hand in hand?
I'm trying to remember the name of this thing that the DA put together just before the 2024 elections, the Something Alliance. We're talking about it just before the podcast. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I mean, fundamentally, that thing was it was a culmination of parties saying, we don't know how 2024 is going to play out, so let's just try band together, create some form of unity, be the obvious opposition to what's going to happen in 2024. And, well, with the ANC, at least. And write it out together. And obviously, as soon as the results came out and GNU was the chat, that thing was like... So, I think now it has to do with looking at the decisions Action SA and Build on South Africa took, fundamentally are political calculations.
Yeah.
They are seeing that even with the infighting, the back and forth within the GNU and the ANC and the DA, they're like, but there's also an advantage to this. And that is you get to have a light shone on you as a member of the GNU by just being members of government. I mean, we're seeing it. Gayton McKenzie's exposure, just by being Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture and just being a part of the Government of National Unity, I mean, it has propelled him. He was already one of the figures talked about in the 2024 election, but more so now because he's seen as one of those ministers who's turning around his portfolio. And that's the image parties want before the 2026 and 2029 elections. They want to be seen as the ones making a difference. Rise Mzansi, not only Vuyiswa Ramokgopa in Gauteng as MEC of Agriculture, but Songezo Ziwi as Scopa chair. I mean, he's pretty much the hawk at Scopa. Nothing flies past him. It's the first time I actually saw us on TikTok. I think it was a month ago. There was actually a hearing from Scopa that was trending on Nexus News on TikTok. And I'm like, I've never seen Parliament trend on TikTok. And other parties are seeing this exposure and they're like, okay, but if we can work our way into this space, we can maybe fiddle with this and get the type of exposure as members of the GNU that could serve us well in 29. So people shouldn't read it as like, oh, they're changing their alliance. No, they're looking at this strategically because being in government will serve them well. It will help them. But no one is going into this GNU expecting to be part of a stable government. I mean, I think people must be realistic when they talk about a coalition government like this, Grand Coalition, GNU, whatever you want to call it. Coalitions are taken, or rather are opted into by parties that share the same ideologies.
Yeah.
Because then there's less fighting. There are more things you agree on. There's more things you agree to do going forward, as opposed to parties that are ideologically just polar opposites. I mean, the Democratic Alliance and the ANC. I mean, the Democratic Alliance's entire playbook and manifesto is everything the ANC stands for, just in opposite, but with a few tweaks. So the ANC wants extremely extensive transformation legislation. The Democratic Alliance believes that's burdensome, and we need to roll that back to an extent. One of the conversations people aren't having is the attack on transformation right now in South Africa. We can unpack that at a later stage. So it's in that environment. Anyone going into the GNU sees this is going to be a compromise administration. And you heard, and I hate quoting Gayton McKenzie, but you heard him say it after the budget was passed. When he went up there, he said, the minister came to us, he told us as GNU partners, we want this, you guys don't want this, let's meet in the middle at 0.5%. And as GNU partners, we agreed. And that's the type of government, I think, if I had to introduce a point, that's the type of government all of these GNU partners should be striving to create. No one is getting what they want unless they can force their way into getting what they want. And the only people in a position to force what they want is the ANC.
Yeah.
The Democratic Alliance must be very realistic. I personally believe this GNU, their job was to just show up, do well in their portfolios, and don't rock the boat too much. Like, they're not in the position to rock the GNU. Like, even of the GNU partners, they are the only, apart from the VF+, Those two are the only GNU partners that didn't vote for this budget.
Yeah.
The IFP voted. The PA voted. Good Party voted. Rise Mzansi voted. And they are outnumbered even within a government of national unity that they form part of. They're not in a position to threaten the ANC. And the ANC obviously showed with this budget that, listen, you can roar, you can kick, you can huff, you can puff. We can still go around you and get what we want. So I think anyone that was very realistic about the outcomes of the elections and the formation of the GNU knew this had to be a compromise administration. The ANC isn't going to go for everything that it wants because it knows there's also a line that these other parties won't cross. But also at the same time, I think the Democratic Alliance must be very realistic about what they can get. And I don't think they can get that much. And trying to hold a budget ransom, I mean, I think strategic miscalculation from the start.
So, yeah, I do want to play devil's advocate here. Reason being is that even though this may have been a celebratory moment for the ANC, there's still 2 more votes you have to get through, right? The distribution of revenue to the provinces and the distribution of revenue to SOEs, if I'm not mistaken. Action SA is hell-bent on ensuring that this VAT increase doesn't happen. They've said that their commitment to this new form or this new partnership or this new agreement, whatever we want to call it, with the ANC is on this basis of VAT not increasing. The finance minister has 30 days as per their recommendation, even though it's not legally binding, which is also another conversation in of itself. If Action SA doesn't support the ANC in 2 and 3 for the next 2 votes, what happens then? Because there's a huge question mark around how do we progress as a country, but also there's a huge question mark as in, did the ANC break fundamental coalition rules? Because around the world, if you had a coalition partner and you decided to opt out of that coalition and get votes outside of that coalition, that's the end of the coalition. South Africa is a bit different because, of course, it is a very new age. We're still trying to figure it all out, and there's different incentives. The DA is kind of stuck protecting the market, trying to ensure that the doomsday coalition of the EFF and MK getting into government doesn't happen.
I just found that doomsday. Yeah, continue.
And then the ANC on the same hand, which I think is very interesting. And I think it will be interesting to see what happens after the NWC, where they meet as the top 7 to discuss what happens with the GNU. You've got to ask yourself a very particular question of how much does South Africa trust us to govern in absence of the DA? Because if you've got business and corporate saying, no, we need you guys to stay together, and everyone saying that in the instance that this coalition fails, we think the markets are going to crumble, but on top of that you've got America, it kind of seems like they have to drag the DA along. Whether they enjoy it or they don't is neither here nor there. And where you sit at as a country is now you've got these 2 parties, which though we do recognize are ideologically opposed, have the same incentive. They have to stay together because they care about the market. They care about South Africa. Well, let's not even get into that. But they claim to care for South Africans and they claim to care to be the ones that want to govern. And already they're showing that they can't. And already they're showing there's an incapacity too. I want to ask this on both ends. If you're the ANC, what do you do? Where do you go? Do you keep the DA along? Because restructuring the GNU means that ministers are going to lose posts because you have to bring in ministers for these new individuals. It also means that the DA has to accept it because we know that's also going to be a fight in and of itself in terms of all the coalition parties agreeing. So what do you do there as the ANC? Similarly, as the DA, walking out might be the thing that seals your fate as a party in this country. Already, the conservative far right is growing significantly because they still want to protect the rights. They're willing to be more vocal. They're willing to fight the transformation that's been happening within South Africa. But at the same time, you also may have this potential of people seeing you as a good governing partner. I don't believe necessarily that's true because we haven't seen that they've been good governance. I mean, according to the Daily Maverick, they've been on the brink of collapse 10 times and they haven't been a coalition for more than a year. I think it's been like 300 days roughly, so there or less.
Yeah, since the election, 300.
And so both of these parties are kind of diametrically opposed to one another, but stuck with each other. Yet there's still a decision to be made about the GNU. Because yes, they claim to have reaffirmed their positions. Yes, they claim to still have talks and still be negotiating. But it's been clear that they haven't been able to see eye to eye. So if there is no bridge, do these two parties close the shop? And does the ANC try and run with a minority government, or does it run with its new coalition partners, which only puts it at 208 or 400 parliament seats, which is a very thin margin? Or do they buy into this idea of we have to govern with the DA and actually make it a workable relationship for the next few years?
I think both of them have an incentive to keep the markets happy. I mean, it's just over 200 days of this GNU. The reality, markets around the world have dealt with coalition governments before. Markets in South Africa are dealing with this for the first time. But I think our financial sector right now is looking at their partners in Europe, in Asia, to say, okay, well, how have you guys fared with your types of coalitions in your countries? Brink of collapse 10 times. Let's be honest. The media likes to sensationalize a bit. And also you must remember, when these types of things are leaked, you must ask yourself, the person leaking this information,
what's the incentive there?
Yeah, what's their incentive for doing this? There's some conversations, some people are fine with the public not knowing. But when they want the public to know, there's an incentive behind that. So I always take that with a pinch of salt, because I'm like, anything's close to collapse. But as long as the people within them have an incentive and have a force behind them that is driving them to stay within this coalition, it's not going to break apart.
Yeah.
I think when we look at the Democratic Alliance and the ANC's obligations here, I mean, the ANC, I think, in their mind, their position is, we've governed without the DA before we can govern without the DA again. And I think what I have heard at least, is that there is a conversation that happens within the ANC that says there will be initial shock in the market, but eventually everything will go back to normal. Because one, I think people forget South Africa's financial architecture is extremely resilient.
Yeah.
And outside of that, I think though the market prefers a GNU, the market prefers a GNU because they're thinking in terms of future planning. Because they're looking at the results of the 2024 elections and they believe that perhaps the DA might be the party that grows out of 2029. In which case, you would want there to be a handover to a party that has had some time in government, some executive experience. I think that's maybe where that incentive to keep the Democratic Alliance comes from. Obviously, you heard this past week, well, at least at the time of recording this podcast, John Steenhuisen saying that just murmurs of this GNU falling apart has wiped R1 trillion off of the market.
Yeah.
Well, I think we must take that with a pinch of salt. That was half GNU, half
America.
Trump's tariffs. I doubt South African finance people looked at the GNU shake and were like, okay, let's remove R1 trillion off the market. I think the tariffs did the bulk of the damage there, if we're being very honest. But nevertheless, it does make people shaky. But fundamentally, I do think there is a lot more for the DA to lose in walking away than there is for the ANC to lose in having the DA walk away.
Yeah.
Because I think in the DA walking away, there's a more complex argument there. Is the DA itself choosing to walk away because it is proving inflexible to the realities of the GNU? And that is the reality that the ANC is the more powerful, more dominant figure that can show its strength and walk around any of the partners. Because I doubt, even the way this coalition was put together, it's not like a conventional coalition around the world.
Yeah.
Where if a party walked out or stepped out, it would be the end. The way this thing was put together, it is uniquely put together to let the ANC govern out these next 5 years the way they think it ought to, but at the same time have a degree of power sharing. Where the sharing is, I don't know. I haven't seen the sharing yet. I think that's maybe something the ANC needs to seriously consider. But that's the position we're in. And if the DA walks away, they lose a lot more because they lose a lot more executive experience. The ANC's been very clear that they can and they will replace you. And they've shown that in the way that they've done now with the budget speech. the dilemma is ultimately, is it unity in name? Or is it... The dilemma is that it is unity in name, but division in practice.
Yeah.
That's the dilemma of this GNU that we're in. It's unity in name and division in practice. I think it's not going to be a smooth ride. I think we're going to have a lot of these moments. I shudder to think about next year's budget because there needs to be another VAT increase next year.
Yeah.
Because people forget the practicality of this is that Treasury is coming up and saying that we need to increase revenue and drastically because we are losing a tax base here that feeds the government. Like the increase from 15% to 17% would have roughly raised around 54 billion rands of revenue at a time where expenditure is increasing. Expenditure in grants, expenditure in infrastructure, expenditure in ministries, provinces, municipalities needing it to help not only recover from the years of state capture, but also be able to catch up with the dilapidation and degradation of infrastructure, railway, roads, ports. All of this needs to happen. One of the benefits is that at least SOEs, well, when I say SOEs, ESCOM is starting to turn around. SAA, I think, clocked a 200 million rand profit last year, which is bloody good to the executive team at SAA. But I think Treasury is coming at this from a practical standpoint to say that we will run out of money and a proposal to borrow more money is not on the cards because we are about to go through we talked about inflationary pressures and the change of an international financial architecture with the US doing what it's doing. Borrowing globally is not going to be a very appetizing thing for us to be doing. So let's stick to what we have. Let's try work with the numbers within the country. We have a mechanism here that can raise 54 billion rands, which we need. I think the DA ministers now know they need revenue in their ministries. Hence why they were also talking about new revenue collection or revenue generation mechanisms with their alternative proposal. But though, and I feel like I need to clarify this like with this last statement now, but though this has a practical face, in practice, it has a political application.
Yes.
And that is, it's being used to show who has power. And that was fundamentally what this was about. Like this budget should have passed easily. But the fight over VAT was fundamentally a fight of, okay, who in this GNU arrangement has power?
Yeah.
And the ANC ultimately showed they have power. So now that that question is removed, it's a question for the Democratic Alliance and maybe even the VF Plus. What is their role in this government now? The markets will go back. They'll rebound if they leave. I doubt anybody who says that there's going to be a total collapse. There will be a shock. And that's what the market is trying to avoid because there's shock happening in America, shock happening in Europe, shock happening in Asia as a result of these tariffs and as a result of people not knowing where the financial architecture of the world is going. They're trying to mitigate shock within the country. But ultimately, everything will go back to normal should in the GNU, the D and the VF Plus leave. And if, it's a question of if they leave with other people. If the GNU itself collapses, and this isn't the DA leaving, this isn't the VF Plus leaving.
The whole thing.
Like Rise, PA, they all leave. Then we have a calamitous situation. Let me spend another minute on this point because I feel like this is the one part of the conversation people aren't having. The government of national unity has partner members. Now, if these partner members leave, I'm talking the D and the VF Plus, if they leave, they aren't the GNU, they're a partner member.
Yes.
The remaining members can stay and they can keep the GNU going. I make this point to say, if the D and the VF Plus leave, it's not the end of the GNU. So all of these people where you hear talking about the end of the GNU, they are thinking about a situation where the other partners leave.
Yes.
Which is plausible right now because there will be blowback on them for voting for this 0.5% VAT increase. As practical as it was, I'm a person, I looked at the numbers. I read the numbers. Numbers don't lie. We needed the money. We still do need the money. But I'm willing to live with the reality that a compromise politically had to be made for expediency's sake.
So I want to push back a bit.
I don't think I answered your question.
No, and that's fine. I think what I do want to push back on, there's still the ANC consideration, right? That's the other side of it. But I do want to say this much, which I think is in all fairness, and I think all South Africans are right if they have this gripe. And I think it's because we don't have a lot of good political memory in the country. We would be lying if we said we're not in this situation because of the ANC.
Yeah.
And I think that means there's a great deal of accountability the ANC needs to take in terms of improving the situation, becoming more efficient as a government, and actually governing, because they haven't done that, especially in the years of state capture. Of course, there was the Mbeki years where we saw a substantial amount of growth. And then, of course, it was state capture and those years that followed. I think where the concern comes in is that it still feels like the ANC to this day doesn't necessarily have a set economic plan. It always feels like they're trying, and I mean, in all fairness, for the last 25 years, we haven't spoken about the budget. It wasn't a process that we cared for. It wasn't something that we could have engaged. We kind of were just like, whatever's said is going to happen.
Yeah.
But where we are now, and the ANC has to engage with the world where they've not spent correctly. There's been mass corruption that they haven't been able to solve. There's issues of embezzlement within the government. Where you stand, you need active solutions, but you also need active targets and also KPIs, because right now it's unclear as to what this budget is to do. We throw around this idea of 3% growth or 1% growth. It's very unclear as to where the government is going and where it's angling for. And I think that's why I say in some onus, I think the DA is correct. There needs to be a better plan, a better, more long-term thinking to how we do governance, rather than a year-on-year end, we get to the budget and we're like, okay, cool guys, let's try and figure this out. And I think from that standpoint, it becomes very hard for me to, even though I understand the numbers, for me to go, I fully understand why the decisions have been made. Because let's also look at the honest reality, right? There's a multitude of suggestions that have been provided. There's been the removal of deputy ministers. There's been empowering SARS to ensure that there's increase, that they can get, revenue. There's been the increase of company tax. So all of these things have been options that have been left to the ANC, where they've also put people in the positions that they are now, where people don't have jobs, people don't have education, people don't have economic opportunity. So any extraction from the people, but particularly from the people who live in your country, and without you telling them that you're guiding them out of this dark time, it feels very much like at times the ANC likes to be in limbo. They like to figure it out when it's at crunch time, when it's at the moment of crisis. And I do ask this for all South Africans, where I say, but when will we get serious about this? We've known about the budget for a substantial amount of time. We've had a great deal of time to talk about it, to negotiate it. The DA claims the ANC held off the conversations until late. But it's unclear right now as to what either party is doing. No party is saying, here's the next 5 years for South Africa. No party is saying, here's how we improve your livelihood, or here's the things that you should expect from us as a government. So it almost becomes impossible to keep our government accountable, because we're always unclear as to what's the thing that they are aiming for, what's the thing that they're angling for. And so even though, yes, I recognize that the budget was the best that we could do, and I think it's true in the 7 out of 10 grants are still accessible, like there's a lot of benefit that comes out of this budget, I go, but you're not necessarily empowering South Africans to no longer be on grants, to be able to access economic opportunities, to be able to access education. It almost feels like the issues that are most pertinent and most core to people seem to be almost not even thought of. They're not considered. And everyone's meant to just like follow along and keep going and saying that we're going to buy into this thing. And so I think the biggest concern for me, and my concern moving forward with both the GNU, but also particularly with the ANC, is how do you keep people happy? Because right now, they're not. Already we know that the South African Communist Party is going to contest elections independent of them, which is going to be very interesting to see in 2026, the municipal election. you can already see there's people in this broad church, which is the ANC, which collects everyone from the right all the way to the left of the spectrum. It's fracturing, and it's fracturing at its core. But there's no one with an answer. There's no one with a solution. And in some ways, because the DA and the MKP and the EFF are on such political far ends of the spectrum, they'll never come together to work together.
Yeah.
The ANC is essentially left leading this thing inevitably without ever having to give solutions, as we've known for the last 25, 30 years. So where do South Africans look forward? How do they move forward? What are the things that people should be looking to? But also, if you are the DA, do you need to start opening up your considerations to actually we might need to buy into one of those far left members to ensure that we have a little bit more say, a little bit more control in this government?
Well, I don't think the DA will ever open up to the far left.
It's true. It's a dream, but yes.
Frankly, because you strike a point that's correct. Both parties are politically, internally at least, are grappling with divisions.
Yeah.
Divisions within the ANC about working with the DA and the VF Plus, which were increased and emboldened now with the budget speech, with people within the ANC saying, you see, we told you can't work with these guys. They throw a fit if they don't get what they want, and look, they're holding the whole budget ransom. Within the DA, people saying, you can't work with these guys. Look at them. They're working around us. They're not hearing us. They're not, quote unquote, they haven't realized that they didn't get a majority.
Yes.
They're not governing that way. And within these two divisions happening within both parties, the political uncertainty within them is going to, and is being fueled by populist rhetoric from the outside.
True.
And that's where the danger is. There's a TikTok sound. Do you know where the danger is? That's where the danger is. The populist rhetoric on the outside. Because it's the populist rhetoric of people that traditionally and historically are DA that is now coming up with this very fringe AfriForum Solidarité, we need to now sanction the ANC talk and chat.
Yeah.
Some are DA, some are VF+. It's coming from there. Within the ANC, you're having this very strong leftist conversation that, no, we can't work with these guys. We can't work with these, I think it's neocons, that's what they say. We can't work with neocons. We need to, as the left, solidify, because the left is under siege, not just in South Africa, but around the world.
Yeah.
Leftist politics is in crisis. This is now when we need to consolidate. So the populist rhetorics from the outside are feeding into the divisions on the inside and is creating a political deadlock in South Africa. It's within that context that I paint that who then can come forward and say, fine, we're going to do away with this conventional budget. And the reason it's a 7 out of 10 is because it's the type of budget we've always passed. But we're going to do away with that, and we're going to have a pro-growth budget. Who has the political capital within their party and within the GNU to actually do that? The ANC doesn't have the political capital to do that, because to get a pro-growth government, a pro-growth budget, it'll require enormous consensus within the party. And the consensus within the party would have to align with what GNU partners would be willing to go along with. The DA can't come with one, because the one they come along with has to be not so much within the party, but has to work with what other formations within the GNU, mainly the ANC, are willing to go along with. And so it's within that context, the results of the election have deadlocked us. For the remaining years of this GNU, you must not expect radical change. This is the autopilot option. But the ANC is strategically trying to extract as much as they can in doing exactly what you're saying, adopting what in Germany they call the Merkel approach, which is you run out the clock to the very last minute, you see where everybody has planted their flag and has rooted themselves, and then you move. Because that's what they did. They ran out. It's the same with the GNU negotiations. Helen Zille, I will always remember saying, the ANC likes to run out the clock. But the ANC runs out the clock, waits till everybody takes a position, and then they move to see who's closer to them or who can they uproot from where they are and bring closer to the position that they want to take. Same as Angela Merkel. In Germany, she was known, they called her indecisive. Same way I think perhaps President Ramaphosa is called indecisive. But She waited till the very last minute and typically got the majority of what she wanted. So I suppose that's where this complaint that there is a lack of decisiveness and there's a lack of determinative leadership comes from. The fact that the ANC has adopted, probably by way of Ramaphosa being the president, this very, we're going to wait out the clock, we're going to let them all jump up and down until they've exasperated themselves, and then we're going to move.
Yeah.
Which is a feature of its leader and is a feature of other leadership styles we've seen around the world. But going back to the point I started with, everyone is fighting battles within their party and are fighting battles outside of their party to come up with a strategy for the country that is determinative, that is pro-growth, that fundamentally reshapes the trajectory South Africa is on and where we now set our new KPIs, where we now scrap the NDP and write up a new realistic plan, because the NDP is not realistic at all. It's not even a plan, it's a vision document.
Yeah.
There's no benchmarks, there's no goals, there's no criteria, there's none of the characteristics of a plan in the NDP. So it's that form of a rewrite that is needed. But that's not going to come from government. Hence why you see civil society and also former leaders of the country in the form of former President Thabo Mbeki saying we need a national dialogue.
Yeah.
Because we need now a new social compact that serves as a minimum program of action for South Africa to say, we, the citizens of South Africa, have had this type of a government and this democratic system for 31 years now. This is now where we want to go. We no longer want to talk about land expropriation as a concept. We want to see it as a practical reality. We want, the national dialogue serving as the place where this program is going to come from, because it's not going to come from within government.
Yeah.
Because I think people often, and I don't blame people, but also at the same time, if you don't pay attention to these things, you're going to lose. But if we don't pay attention to the political realities facing these guys in government and in politics, we're going to find ourselves always being perplexed with the decisions they take, because they're not taking decisions from the purview of where the public is. They're taking decisions from the purview of political chess players. And we can tell them not to play the game of political chess players, but we aren't in the chess game. They're in the chess game. They choose not to play the game. They find themselves being removed from the board altogether. And I think it's very hard for people to rationalize that. But it's the practicalities of the environment that we live in right now. Hence why I looked at the budget and I was like, it's the best we're probably going to get. And when I listened to the points from Treasury, GNU now, and I'll end with this because I've been talking for 6 minutes. GNU now and GNUs going forward are all going to be autopilots. None of them are going to have drastic, well, maybe one in a blue moon will have a drastic seismic shift for society in South Africa. But the bulk are going to plant themselves exactly where they start and make a few adjustments that aren't too radical. Or if they make adjustments, they're going to be piecemeal.
Yeah.
It's not going to be wholesale, Mbeki style, we're throwing out RDP, we're moving with gears. That's not going to happen. For that, you need a party with a majority, especially given how far apart each of these parties are ideologically, politically, economically, and socially. You have to look at those. Those are factors we need to keep in careful consideration here when we critique this. Because that's the concern in the back of my mind. I'm like, fine, do what you want. But I see an environment where this backfires. It's the same with the people that want Ramaphosa to resign. I'm one of those people. I'm a political realist. I look at the landscape. I'm like him or hate him, the markets like him.
Yeah.
Internationally, the way he's maneuvering in Europe, I mean, the way Ursula von der Leyen, I've never seen her more excited to see an African head of state than when she's with him. The way internationally, at least, he's able to maneuver South Africa's prowess. I think he's strategic. I want him to be more decisive. I think everyone wants him to be more decisive. But I also am realistic of the fact that back in 2018, when he came to power, I was one of those people listening to Prince Mashele and all of these political commentators saying he's inheriting a divided ANC. He's inheriting a politically hostile environment for him. If he survives a full 10-year term, it'll be a miracle. And so a part of my mind is like, I can't really discredit him for being cautious. But at the same time, my reptilian brain tells me I want him to move faster, to move harder, to be more decisive, be less consultative, more Mbeki Zuma style.
I think in the practical application, a lot of what you say speaks to where the country needs to be in terms of people being practical, leadership being current, issues being dealt with. And I think as you kind of correctly identify there's a game of chess that's being played. And I think within that game of chess, there's a massive contradiction. And we see it all the time. On one end, you get people who are extremely upset at things such as the Bella Bill Act, NHI, Expropriation Act. Then you get the business and corporations writing to the GNU to say, please stay together. So there's this thing of, and I think it's the thing they speak of quite significantly throughout most of the reports, that you can't play opposition and be in government at the same time, right? There's something innate, and the issue is so apparent that the DA and the ANC are clearly just never going to see each other as friends. Not even acquaintances or even partners. They still see each other as directly opposed to each other. And I think you speak quite significantly to the internal fights that become external and how that kind of ends up being its own loop. I do think the big question I have there is who's leading the GNU and what's that meant to look like? Because on one end, we've got someone like President Ramaphosa who had his leaked audio where he was like, you shouldn't necessarily interrupt your advisories when they're making mistakes. When he was speaking about the DA and the demands that they were making and the fact that they weren't going to be part of the
they were going to
budget votes. They were going to exclude themselves. And he's been very explicit to say the ball is in your court. If you want to exit the GNU, that's by your own choosing, but we won't necessarily be the ones to kick you out. But there's also been a very strong sentiment to say that, but we are leading this GNU. We are the leaders of this coalition. You must listen to us. You must hear from us. We can't keep acting like we're equal partners. And I think this becomes a very interesting consideration because there's a conversation about fair play, fair engagement, being transparent, being equitable. But there's also like a very obvious disparity that says one party has 20%, the other party has 40%. And both of those elements are always interesting depending on who's speaking. Because from the ANC, it's like, but we have the votes. Like we the bigger party. We have the bigger mandate. And from the DA, it's to say, we understand you have the votes, but with us, you don't have the vote, which I guess now the budget's proven the DA is neither here nor there. It's really more talk. But what do you do with that? Because you've got two parties who keep edging and vying for, we are the ones leading this. We are the ones that are taking South Africans forward. I think a lot of it, as you say, does have political considerations, particularly to who's going to be credited for the improvements, who's going to be credited for improving the budget and ensuring that things get better. But I think at a more simple and fundamental point, there's just a question on, but when will these parties accept where they are as they are? Because it always seems like they're fighting outside of what's their scope. So the ANC all the time seems to be combative to a minority party when it doesn't need to be combative. They're your partner. And in the same way, the DA doesn't necessarily want to cooperate when it's not everything their way. Or, well, potentially not everything, but a great deal their way, because they also want to have a great deal of influence. And we saw it with their proposal to be a part of Operation Vulindlela. We saw it about how their approach to this budget was, where it was a significantly greater consideration than just the budget itself. It was how the fiscal framework is implemented, what processes we're using. But both of these parties don't agree about where they sit, and they don't agree about what their influence ought to be. Where do they move forward from here? Because on one end, I can rationalize both sides. Both sides need to be represented. Both sides need to be heard. And this conversation continues to show itself. It showed itself in the negotiations for the GNU. It showed itself in the allocation of ministerial posts. It even showed itself in the failure of creating a provincial government of unity in Gauteng, where they weren't able to reach that agreement. And there's almost this game of chess where both parties seem to do it. The DA sends a proposal, then says, no, actually, we want to change it. And the ANC similarly will sit on a proposal and then wait for the last minute and say, actually, no, we're going to do this our way. if you've got that major tension about leadership being separate, about the approach being separate, but also potentially, and I think the greater consideration that many South Africans don't see, a very deep political ANC bench, which seems to be running circles around the DA in terms of just how many victories they've had politically. These parties don't seem to be talking to each other, but beyond not talking to each other, these parties aren't willing to say, you should lead, we shall follow. And so until they make that concession, if they are to ever make that concession, what do these parties do with each other? Do they continue to act as that they're still representing two different politically opposed sides in South Africa? Or do they come to say, actually, at some point, we'll show a great deal of maturity and we'll actually do what's necessary for South Africa to move forward?
If I had to give my recommendation, fundamentally, they look at each other still as adversaries. I think the moment they walked into a GNU, there should have been a recognition on both ends, which they do talk to when they are talking to the press, but I don't think they talk to when they're actually in these discussions. And that is, I can't get it fully my way, and you can't get it fully your way either.
Yeah.
We need to meet in the middle for a compromise here. And the great challenge is exactly as you put it. The DA, though it wants this type of a relationship, still goes in trying to get 100% of its mandate. And the ANC sees that and is immediately like, okay, we're not even going to entertain this. There needs to be a recognition. The good faith principle needs to be when we come to the table, when we come to talk, we say these are our hard yeses, these are our hard no's, these are the ones we're willing to be amenable on. Because the reality is, there are certain things going into the negotiation, you're going to upset someone. Not just someone, you're going to upset your biggest partner in this. For the ANC, that being the DA, for the DA, that being the ANC, you're going to upset, and then you're going to rock the boat.
Yeah.
Hence why I say this is an autopilot coalition. But there's no doubt who's leading it in its present form, and that is the ANC. But the ANC does not want to take too many drastic moves where they are right now. They're just trying to stabilize the plane where it is, get us through the turbulence, and hope that beyond that we'll still have some capacity to continue climbing. So I think within that context, both sides need to mature up. I don't think any of them have been mature in this conversation. The maturity ended after the signing of the initial statement of intent and the forming of this government of national unity. As for bringing in new partners, I mean, I think, firstly, Gauteng illustrates what we spoke about earlier, the fact that there is this internal division within the party, because very much you saw that internal other faction of the ANC saying, you can have it in Pretoria and in Cape Town, where the executive is, you're not going to have it here in Gauteng. So very much that, I think, showing the Democratic Alliance that, listen, you're working with a partner here who you must be cognizant of their flexibility, which I think, every partner of the ANC must be very cognizant of the party's flexibility right now. But in terms of bringing in other partners, I mean, must also remember, as a proportion of what was in the statement of intent, the ANC actually has more ministries.
Yeah.
So if they wanted to bring in more partners, the gripe wouldn't be to say, okay, Sviwe, we're removing you from education. Herman, we're going to put you in education. Gayton, we're removing you from sports. Musi, you're going to be... It's probably going to be from the ANC's own ministries, where they're going to be like, comrade, you're a deployee of the party. We're going to ask you to step aside now just so we can bring in this other GNU partner. And there'd be less of a fight. And what would the other... I mean, obviously, the statement of intent also talks about bringing in partners and all of that. So that'll be another fight and another gripe. I look forward to seeing actually SA being brought into the GNU and how that conversation is going to go down. But I think in summary, it's a very sensitive place where we are in right now. It's going to require a lot of maturity on all sides. And when they talk about good faith, there must be a genuine step forward in that respect. I think people forget the first GNU in 94 collapsed.
After 2 years.
After 2 years. Yeah. And it was because the then National Party ministers just couldn't work with the ANC ministers. And obviously then President Mandela had well over 50%. So he was very comfortable in telling de Klerk and his guys, well, if you guys don't want to work with us, take a hike. President Ramaphosa, I think, is showing that he has the capacity to make the same statement, but it'll be by a very thin margin that he'll have the capacity to push through the ANC's mandate. And he'll be probably, not just him, but the ANC would be weaker should the DA leave to a smaller party saying, we're not going to give you our support. And then they're exactly at 49% on something in parliament.
Yeah.
So the reason I'm saying this in summary is that maturity, the one characteristic that has been missing from this whole arrangement is what's needed now more than ever. More than good faith, just the maturity to say, this is just, it's an autopilot. You will hear me say, no one will convince me that this will be the government of drastic change. It is an autopilot administration. And to that extent, we must just make peace with the fact that we're not going to get drastic change.
Yeah.
And if people wanted that, then they should have voted in overwhelming fashion for one party to get a majority. South Africa's political landscape isn't like the rest of the world. There's a diversity, yes, on the left and a little bit of diversity on the right. But parties that are in the center that can mix and work together, that sort of ability to do that type of work doesn't exist here. That sort of bipartisan working together, that culture hasn't yet been developed. The appetite for it hasn't yet been fully developed. I always find it ridiculous when people say, the voters made clear to us that they wanted us to work together.
No, they didn't.
The voters couldn't decide. The voters couldn't make up their minds.
I think there's an element of brinkmanship that's apparent between both parties. Maybe more so to the ANC than the DA, in terms of trying to bait out your opposition, see where they are, as you said, and they wait for the final moment. I do think moving forward, though, with legal cases coming up, these two parties are going to be on opposing sides. I don't understand how this is going to work. But even beyond that, with the legality, with the political pressure, it doesn't seem like they can hide the fact that they're not working anymore. And I think that's the biggest concern for me, is when this thing started, we had hope.
Yeah.
Same way we had hope, the Ramaphoria that we had in 2018, 2019, we thought the world was going to change. And then it quickly crumbled. And of course, in Ramaphosa's first year, it wasn't necessarily all him. There was also COVID-19, there was a global pandemic. I mean, it seems like every time Cyril Ramaphosa starts a new term, there's an enemy, eh? Now it's Trump.
Headwinds after headwinds. Yo.
But
his memoir is one I want to read.
Yeah.
Anyway, continue.
But within that, these parties have now made it clear that they don't want to work with each other. I mean, the singing of Abahambe after they've voted in the budget is a clear sign of a party rejecting you. And it almost feels like both of these parties are in a bad relationship, a toxic relationship, where they're both going to see how far they can hurt each other until one decides to actively leave or to react. And I think the question there is, and I think where we close it, is do you think the GNU survives 2025? And do you see it surviving 2026? I would say I'm confident that the GNU survives. I'm not confident that both the DA and the FF Plus will be part of the GNU. However, I am willing to say there is a world where I'm willing to buy this idea of the DA and the ANC find an agreement to how to go about municipal elections, because I think the fracturing that we're seeing on a national level is going to be horrible at a local level. They're going to need each other. They're going to need to come together. They can't run away from what is the frank reality of them co-governing, potentially for the foreseeable future. And within that, they have to find adequate solutions, and they have to find meaningful mechanisms to talk. I mean, they keep talking about this clearinghouse mechanism. It hasn't been there. Hey, this thing, we've spoken about it time and time again. It hasn't existed. But at least one thing I can say is that no matter how hard it gets, no matter how bad it gets, these people did start off as opposition to each other.
Yeah.
So they do know the extreme extent of what it means to be on opposing sides, to not be in agreement, to be supporting votes of confidence against the party's officials. They've been at the worst. This is nowhere close. I mean, and I always say, even the negotiations during apartheid, it was Kadeso 1, Kadeso 2, there was the Pretoria Minutes. There was a multitude of conversations that took place over 4 years. Like, that wasn't an easy negotiation process. So I don't necessarily think the GNU in any means is going to be pretty, is going to be smooth sailing, and is going to give people the comfort that they need. So with that being said, I do see a world where I think this thing stays intact. It remains. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the updates and how it's communicated. The ANC was sounding very staunchly anti-DA, and the DA was sounding very staunchly anti-ANC on Wednesday. But maybe they'll amend. Maybe they'll find each other, and they'll find the maturity that we so ask them for. What are your thoughts?
I think in rhetoric, none of them have said anything they can't walk back.
Yes.
So there's already, for me, there's that hope. Because I analyzed what they said. The Minister of Finance said that statement. He said it firmly, but he said it as a passing statement.
Yes.
So it can be walked back. What Helen Zille said, and John Steenhuisen himself. I mean, I think Steenhuisen's already starting to walk back a bit of the...
Yeah.
By saying, the DA is still committed to this thing. So, practically looking at this thing, the GNU will hold. Will the DA still stay? Give me another budget vote, and I'll tell you. But it'll be determined by how the DA does in the local government elections. For the ANC, it'll be determined by who wins in 2027 at their elective conference. These are the two determining factors as to whether... It's funny, we're talking about whether the DA stays. Both decisions will tell me whether that specific party stays. But I am... In terms of the other elements, I'm like, practically, it's a kerfuffle.
Yeah.
But they're going to get over it. South Africans come August will have forgotten about the budget.
Yeah.
The budget will get through. 0.5% is here to stay. I don't care what Action SA says. They're going to end up, they'll walk it back because they want into the GNU. It's going to happen. And the reality is that we need to make peace with the fact that it's going to be a bumpy 5 years.
Facts.
We're going to have lots of moments like this. We just need to learn quickly to get desensitized to this and block our ears to the hysteria whilst at the same time paying key note and attention to the important pieces of legislation that come up. I think, remember I said in the first episode, expropriation bill is being fought in the court of public opinion. Everything else is going to be fought in the court of public opinion. And it's now more than ever where I will end by agreeing with you and saying it'll be here to stay, but I'll end with a caution that these forces on the fringe, these forces on the outside, the reactionary populist forces, they potentially could be the thing that ends coalition politics nationally. Because if they become more influential publicly, and their voices be the ones that drown out genuine public opinion, the GNU ends in a smoking heap of fire. And that's a reality that's just too ghastly to contemplate. So it's going to work. The people in it are invested in making it work. We have to see if the next leader of the ANC will be invested in making it work. It's almost certain the next leader of the DA is going to be invested in making this thing work. But they need to mature up.
Yeah.
They're acting like children. They need to mature up. And that's a 20-year-old telling them they need to mature. They need to grow up. They need to make peace with the fact that they are where they are. The environment isn't going to change. They need to change.
Yeah. Well, I guess episode 2, done and dusted. I want to say thank you very much to you once again. I think we're having good conversations. To everyone else out there, hopefully you've made it to this end. If you've made it this far, please do like and subscribe. And as always, enjoy the fact and enjoy the conversations that we're having. Feel free to comment, to share, to let us know what your thoughts are. And enjoy Born Free. Thank you very much.
Danko.